Hi, and welcome back to my shop. We're really kind of coming down to the home stretch now with this tool chest. I spent some time to finish sanding up the drawer sides, so those are all ready to go. And now we have the bracket feet attached, so there's really not a whole lot left to do before we can start finishing. But I do need to do the final fitting of the drawers, which I'm going to concentrate on in this episode. If you'll recall back when I first constructed the guts of the case, I hadn't actually put in the drawer dividers yet, and I actually still have to do the kickers as well. I'm just going to be doubling up the runners and make those kickers. And that'll kind of snug everything up inside the case when I insert the drawers. The reason I left these dividers till the end is I wanted to make sure that my drawers fit nicely before I glued those dividers down to make sure that everything kind of works smoothly. So that's what I'm going to concentrate on this episode. I've gone ahead now and put my first drawer in, and this is going to be kind of a key part of the project, is fitting the drawers, because I want to have an even reveal all the way around. Now you can see right off the bat that, of course, the bottom, since it rides on the base here, there's no reveal at all. And if you look over on the left-hand side here, whether it's due to the fact that I may have sanded a little bit off or I'm not perfectly square here, I have a wider gap at the bottom than I do at the top. In fact, if I push the drawer all the way to the left so that the top is touching, I still have a fairly good sized gap at the bottom. So I need to clean up both that bottom gap as well as straightening out this side gap. So I'm just going to go around to the side here and just make a mark in this top corner to remind me that I need to remove some material from that top side. So you may be wondering, how am I going to knock off the entire edge for the top of this drawer? The reality is all I really need to do is bevel this corner a little bit at the top and kind of blend it in so that I get a nice straight line. I don't have to remove all the material all the way down, because you're not going to be able to see that when the drawer is closed. All you're going to see is the very end of this gap. And that's pretty important because it means I don't have to completely sort of reshape my drawer. So all I'm going to do is take my block plane. I've just sharpened the iron. It's pretty important that this is a nice sharp blade. And I'm going to tilt it on its end just a little bit and take a very light shaving. And I'm putting a little more pressure on towards the top and then relieving the pressure as I go. And what that's going to do is give me a bevel that's much deeper at the top than it is at the bottom. And so I'm only removing material from the drawer front. I'm not touching the maple at all. So you can see here where this bevel that I removed starts at about here at the top of the drawer and tapers all the way down to nothing at the bottom. So that I've only removed material at that very top. So I've removed just a slight amount, so I'm going to pop my drawer out of my vise and go put it back in the case and see how close we are. Alright, so I will drop the drawer in, and I'm going to snug it up against the left-hand side as best as I can so that I can really get an accurate measure of how close I am. So I definitely have a little bit more of a gap now towards the top, but I still need to remove a little bit more material because I still have a slightly wider gap towards the bottom. Alright, so I've just hit that edge with 3 or 4 more passes on that block plane, and being really cautious to sneak up on this, because the last thing I want to do is remove too much material, and then I have the opposite problem and I have to remove material from the bottom. So you can see now that I'm getting pretty darn close. There is still a very slightly wider gap at the bottom than at the top, but because I hit this with the plane, I do need to go back and sand that a little bit so that I get a nice smooth surface. So if I hit that with some 220 sandpaper, by the time I'm done cleaning that up, this will be a nice, perfectly sized gap along the entire side of the drawer. I went ahead and I just kind of broke the edges of this drawer a little bit and just cleaned it up and gave it kind of its final sanding, but it is nice and fit. It looks good. The gap is perfect all the way around. So then I just move on to my next drawer and basically just repeat the process. With any luck, this one will be closer. Yeah, pretty much the same deal. I need to remove a little bit from the top left here. This side's pretty straight, so I don't know if that's something indicative of my technique where I'm consistently removing too much material when I sand towards the bottom, but I'll just keep plowing along until I get all these drawers all dialed in and fit well. I've gone ahead and cut some strips that are the exact same width as my runners, and these are basically going to serve as my kickers, and they're just going to get glued to the bottoms of the runners. So I've gone ahead and inserted the bottom drawer, and then I just want to double check that when I slide that doubler in there that's serving as my kicker, I still have room for my drawer to move back and forth. I just wanted to ensure that this wasn't going to actually extend too far down and actually rub the top of this drawer, because the fronts are already fairly well fit. So I'm in good shape there. Next, I will glue my kickers to the bottoms of the runners for the drawers just above them. And basically this is, you know, a long grain glue joint, so I really don't need any mechanical joinery or any other reinforcement. I can just glue these, and you know, they really aren't going to receive a lot of stress either, because they're basically just there to take up space. Give it a little rub joint. A little clamping action. And that should be enough to secure those kickers. I now have all of my kickers glued on. The kickers on the top two levels are double wide, so that gives me an even bigger glue joint to work with. So now the only thing that's left is to actually do the middle dividers for the top two layers. Now that's basically just what's going to guide the drawers on the inside. So I cut my dividers, and these are just going to be a little bit different than how I manage the kickers. First of all, the front has to line up. You're actually looking in at the back of the case here. The front has to line up perfectly with that front divider, otherwise the drawer could get caught. And I've also cut this so that it runs a little bit long. It runs almost to the back of the case. The trick here is that I just won't glue that part that overlaps with this back divider. I'm only going to glue it to the actual runner here. But I wanted that to be as long as possible so that it guides the inside of the drawer, the full length of the drawer. I've gone ahead now and just inserted the two drawers that will go in this level. And I have the drawer divider here. Again, we're looking in through the back once again. And all I have to do is make sure that my divider effectively just splits the difference between the gap between the drawers. Once I've got the drawers in there and they're flush on the front of the face, I know that this is going to guide the drawers so that they will always remain nice and square and flush. So I'll just make a little mark to indicate on either side where the end of that divider needs to go. And then I just have to glue it in place. Now I've got it secured both in the front and the back, and I can just double check that that is perfectly aligned with my middle divider, and I'll just allow that glue to dry, and then I'm just going to repeat the process for the top two. Well, in kind of all the work I was doing, I almost completely forgot that I also have to make the back of the case. And I wanted to make this sort of a traditional back. I mean, a lot of people will just use plywood and set it in the rabbet in the back, but I want to kind of use a traditional method. So what I've done is milled up a bunch of leftover scrap butternut. And you might ask, well, why am I using my primary material to make the back? Well, these aren't the nicest offcuts. You know, you can see this has some knots in it. There's another piece in here that's got a lot of sapwood, so it's not like I'm using material that I would have otherwise used for something nice. What I'm going to do is shiplap these, and the reason behind that is it's going to allow for the boards to expand and contract seasonally. They'll only get attached at the center of each board at the top and the bottom, and then they can expand into that shiplap joint. And a lot of people would probably just either go to the table saw and install a dado blade, or they would go maybe to their router table and install a rabbiting bit on the router table. I'm going to use the jointer because I don't want to put the dado stack in my table saw, because I'm going to have to start ripping these down, or at least rip one of them down at the end to get it to the right width. And I really don't want to put any extra wear and tear on my router bits. So I'm going to show you how I'll do that on the jointer. The first thing I have to do is remove the guard. And this is one of the few operations where you have to remove the guard for your jointer. Otherwise, you always want to leave that on there. Now, the way the rabbit's going to work is that basically the board sits on this shelf here, which is on the, outside of the jointer. And I've spun my blade around with the machine unplugged so that in this case, the way the spiral cutter works on this, only one of the 3 rows sticks out this far all the way to the edge of the table. So I find that one that sets out the furthest, and I've got a 1/2 inch setup block here. I'm basically going to make my shiplaps overlap by exactly a 1/2 inch. It really doesn't matter how deep that shiplap is, as long as they're all the same. And then I just slide my fence until it gets to the end. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect because this is really somewhat of an arbitrary measurement here. What is important though is that I set my rabbit depth to be exactly half the thickness of the boards. Now they're 1/2 inch boards, so that means I need a rabbit that's exactly 1/4 inch deep. So the only thing I need to really keep in mind here is I'm going to go through and I'm going to rabbit one edge, and again I'm going to be really cautious of the fact that that's a spinning blade. Then I'm just going to flip it and then run the other rabbit on the other side. And I'm only going to do this with about 3 or 4 of the boards, and then whichever ones I decide are going to be the outside most boards, I'm just going to rabbit on one side because they're actually going to be squared off on the other side. Now that I have all of my parts milled, all I have left to do is install the back of the case. And basically for this operation, I'm going to use a cut nail, and I'm going to put one at the middle of both the top and bottom of each shiplap piece. And cut nails, because they're sort of wedge shaped, require that you drill a pilot hole first. So I'm just going to need to line each piece up, run a pilot hole through it, and then I can drive the nails in. And then when I install the next piece with the overlapping shiplap, I'm just going to leave a 1 nail gap between the two, and that will give me room for expansion and contraction seasonally. And here you can see the completed case back, really done in sort of a traditional style using the shiplap boards and a single cut nail at the top and bottom of each.